Alright, let's get this started. This is Game Maker Studio. This is what you first see when you open up the program. As you can see right here, we have all these little folders on the side here. In these folders, they're labeled like sprites, sounds, backgrounds, script, shaders, fonts, timelines, objects, rooms, etc. Basically, these are all the folders. These are your directories for your game. So just to start off, let's open the sprites folder. And as you see, I have a bunch of sprites already loaded in here. But if you wanted to create a new sprite, you you would right click on the sprites folder, go to create sprite, and right here you see you can name it whatever. So you'd be like test sprite, and then you can load in whatever. Let's load in castle sprite or something like that. And you can, go in here, edit, double click this, and you can do all sorts of wacky edits you want right here. And then you can just like save it right there, blah blah, and there you go. There's your new sprite. So obviously I'm not gonna do that. So just delete that, delete this, and you want to name your sprites pretty much what they are. You could even name it like player sprite, floor sprite, enemy sprite, etc. But you need a sprite um, to have your game looking well. So after that, after you say load in the player sprite, you want your player sprite to do something. So first, you have to turn your player sprite into a object. So you go here, right click, you go to create object, and let's name this player to object. You don't want your object to be named the exact same as your sprite because of the naming system when coding. So as long as you have like an object after it, it'll be fine. That way you know that when you're coding, you're not calling the sprite and you're actually calling the object. So when you make the object, you come here, you'll see sprite, and right now it says no sprite because we haven't selected one. So let's see. So player 2 sprite, just like we'll take the enemy sprite or the player sprite, and there you go. Now you have your object, and the object is linked to this sprite. So your object will look like this when playing the game. And for a whatchamacallit, for like something like an enemy or something that you want to interact with, I would recommend probably not making it solid because they're like when you make something solid, you're not able to like easily like interact with it. Solid's basically used for like floors or say like a wall or something. But typically like an enemy sprite or like a player object, stuff like that, you don't want those to be solid. Alright, so now that I've shown you how to make a player object, let's get rid of that. Alright, so when you load in, you'll see your events and actions thing right here. Events are your upper hierarchy of how you want your coding to go. So like on the create event, if you want to add an event, you go down here, you do add event, you choose create, and it will create this right here, which is create. So once you click on create, you'll see this, which will have no actions in it when you first load it up. And if you want to add code to it, you go over to the side here, you click on control, and you'll see this thing that says execute code. So you drag this in here, and it will create a code thing that you can edit. And then, so right here we have player properties. To name these files, basically all you do is you do 3 slashes. It's one. If you want a regular comment on your code, you do 2 slashes. If you want to name the file of the script, you would do 3 slashes. And that way you can name it. So I just named this one player properties. All I have in here right now is score equals 0. But yeah, stuff in here you do like player health, player lives. Since it's just a simple game, I didn't implement health or lives. It's either I kill the enemy or I get hit by the enemy, and I die if I get hit. So there's no need for player health in this simple game right here. So now let's move on to having your player move. What you want to do to get your player moving is you want to add an event called step. When you click on step, you want to just click on step and it will create step. step right here. So I have this called player movement. So right here we have a called player movement, and first of all we set up gravity for our player. Gravity is important in a platformer because when you're going from a higher elevation, you don't want to, well, you want to be able to fall down to the lower place. So we have gravity here. The gravity direction is what way you want your gravity to happen. If this was 90 instead of like 270, instead of falling to the ground, you would fall up into the sky. So basically, what GameMaker does is they have their own little scripting language. Basically, they have all these functions which you can look up through the Google, which you can look up through GameMaker docs, and they have all these functions listed that you can use. Alright, so place free, basically what that is just, it's checking to see if the current location at the X and Y position here are free of objects. And if they are free of an object, it'll set the gravity down, and the gravity direction will be set downwards. And this else statement right here is basically for when, if you're on the ground, touching the ground, you can jump. So that's all that is. Right here are boundaries. Basically, X boundary. If my X is located, if the X goes to the left side of the screen, I don't want to go off the screen, so I set my X back to 0. And if I reach the end of this room, obviously I want to go to the next room. That's what this is. And if my Y is lower than the room height, that means I fell into a pit and I just died. And now then on to keyboard presses. So basically the keyboard presses in here are simple. You know, it's checking to see if this is a press, and if so, do this. So right here we have, you know, if the current location is free, my X to my left, because X is negative to the left. So if my location -4 pixels to left me is free, then if I press left, I will go left 3. I'll move left at 4 pixels. Whereas here, this is checking to see if I am also holding shift, my left shift button, while moving, and that will also increase my speedment by 3. So basically this is the run clause and this is the normal walk clause. And right here we have the same thing for going right. If you go right, checking to see if, you know, force space to your right is free. If so, same as the left. And right here we have jumping. So it's basically saying if the place is not free, so if I am on the ground, because it's checking my Y this time instead of my X, if I'm on the ground, then I can jump. And the vertical and V speed is the value they use for the vertical speed. And that is how high I jump. Alright, so moving on now, we have collision events. So right here you go to add event and you add collision. And then you can choose to add a collision with any sort of, just add a collision with anything here. These are all your objects. So just add, so like this is the floor thing, wall collision. Basically this, for the wall collision, it's saying if, you know, what I'm running into is solid, it'll set my direction what it currently is and the max distance. And then if, you know, it's solid, you know, my vertical speed is 0. This is for walking. So this is checking to see if I'm colliding with the ground, and if so, my V speed is 0. And I share this collision with pretty much anything, as long as the collision is whatchamacallit, as long as the collision below me, it is solid. I don't need to do a collision for the horizontal speed, because all of these objects are solid, and that's what solid does. It makes me unable to pass them through just object. So that's why you don't really want like enemies to be solid. You want them to be able to do their own thing. Now we have the enemy collision right here. So let's open this up, and basically this is how you kill the enemies. So it's asking if your Y is less than their Y, and if so, it will destroy the other things. Basically this means if you're jumping on top of them, and it will destroy them. That's with other instance destroy, because you're colliding with the other object, and it will play the death sound, and it will add to your score. But otherwise, if I touch them from like the side, then I get destroyed. And so let's go up to the destroy event. So to do destroy event, this is what happens when you are destroyed. So you'd click destroy, add this, and this is how it restarts the game. Basically, it plays a death sound, it stops the background music, and then it restarts the current room that you are in. And here we have the coin object. The coin object, whenever you collide with it, it will add 10 to your score, play the coin sound, and then it will destroy the coin. And here we have, this is how you draw a GUI. Basically, I have the GUI attached to the player object, and this is where we're going to be drawing the score. So as long as the player is alive, the score will be shown. So basically what you do here, you use draw and set your color. This is black. So make the score black, draw the text at 3232, and this will be 3232 relative to wherever the view on the screen is. Not just 3232 of the room you're in, but just what's actually being viewed at the time. So it'll always be up in the upper left hand corner if you do it like that. Basically, saying this is what I want it to be called, and then right next to it I have the actual score variable. So that's pretty much it for the player object, and now let's move on. So you don't really need to add any code really for like wall movements or off. All you need is the collision event with them, and just make sure that the solid right here is clicked. And now we have the enemy object. So for the enemy object, we have a couple different things differently in the create. So when you open up this, we have this, and basically, hold on, let me just name this real quick just to show. So enemy movement variables. So save that, and look, now that's changed. So here, basically, this is code so the enemy can auto move, and a way to change the enemy's direction. So when you go into the step, let's just name this as well. Alright, so basically right here, we're making the enemy move equal to the direction that the enemy is currently moving in times what the speed of the enemy is. So this right here is how we determine whether the enemy has moved or not, because we have all these if statements here. Then down the bottom, the x is equaling the enemy move. So as we said before, the current enemy direction is -1, and that means all the enemies are going to start out moving left with a speed of 3. So right here, it's adding a -3 to my enemy move because it's doing the enemy direction times the enemy speed. And now this is where it gets a little bit more tricky, because now we have to check to see if the enemy is currently colliding with an object on the screen. So if my X and the enemy move is meeting with a pipe, this is another way to check to see where an object is on screen with another thing, similar to how the player also does this. So if the enemy is meeting this, the enemy move is set to 0, meaning it stops moving, and then the direction will be changed back to -1, and then it resumes its way back on the other way. So now you're timing the enemy direction by -1, so if it was -1, if you're moving left, you're now moving right, and etc. But while it's moving, while it's not meeting this object, it will move the enemy the normal amount. So basically you do that for every object you want the enemy to interact with. Right here we have move the pipes, and enemy boundaries, and building block objects. Alright, so once again these don't have anything because they're there, and this castle object, I'm just using it as a background thing, so it doesn't need to be solid because I'm not actually going to be interacting with it at all. Alright, so right here we have an enemy bound object. Basically this right here is what I'm using as another way to get the enemies to move back and forth. Because back here in the enemy object step, we have right here, if places meeting with the enemy bound object, which is that empty object right there, it does the same as the codes prior. And that brings us to, let's see, so I chose not to have this shown because this isn't actually going to be part of the scene. It's just going to be a thing that I place into the map that just tells the enemy, this is something, when you hit it, you need to turn back around and start moving in the other direction. And I'll open that up right now, and we go into the room. So to create a new room, you would just right click and you create room, and it will create a room for you. And you have this right here, and it just gives you all the settings. You name the room, give the room a width and height, a speed, this is the number of steps per second, and that really only affects like alarms and stuff. So let's get rid of that room that we just created and go into our actual room. Alright, so this right here is our room. My width is pretty long because it's a full-size level, and that's where it ends. So to start, we have the width, the height, the speed, and now we go to backgrounds, and you can set up a background, and you can add in whatever backgrounds you have here, because I can either do that or I can do that, and it all just fills it in. Alright, so if you want to place something into your map, you go to objects, and right now we have the player object selected. You would click on him if you want to select something else. So if we want to place another block here, we would, oh yeah, this right here is the snap XY. This is what, see these lines right here, this is your grid. So if you want your thing to snap to say by, you want every block to be its own 32 by 32 pixel block, that's how you set this up. So I do 64 by 64. Now everything snaps to a 64 by 64 type grid. But I have all the sprites in here set up to a 32 by 32, so that's how it works right now. So basically, if you want to play something, you select it, you just drop it, and they're all set up already. However you set them up, the object and the thing. If you want to delete them, you can just hold down Control, right click, right click, right click, bam. It's really easy to add and drop objects. So these green boundaries right here are what I was just explaining about the enemy boundaries that are not visible. These green things will not actually show up when you're actually playing the game because they are not visible. They're only here to serve as a way to stop these enemies from running off, pretty much and killing themselves. But other than that, this is pretty self-explanatory. Just drag, and you can just make your objects however you want to make them. Up here is something that I forgot to explain, but right here is a object that I created that does not have a sprite. If an object you create doesn't use a sprite, it will just show up like this. And that right there is the sound manager, and that is what starts playing the background music. That's all it does. Just it creates when levels made. It creates the background music. Bam, that's it. And it doesn't have any more action until the level is restarted. Oh yeah, there is one thing I forgot to say about the rooms. Alright, so when you make your width and height of the room, this is your room. When you load up the game, without changing any other settings from what I've said already, you would view your entire room all at once. All 6,752 pixel widths of it. To change that, you go to the view setting, and you want to enable the use of view. And what this does is you want to make sure the view 0 is visible when the room starts out, and it will only show whatever width and height of the window you show here. So the port on the screen would be, right now I just have 1024 768. That's just, pretty much simple 4-3 style box, and you want to have it follow your player object if you want it to scroll left and right. So basically what this does is the horizontal border around the visible object in pixels. So basically this, when it reaches, say, half screen, that's why 512, it's half 1024. When it gets to half screen, this box will start moving across the level here. So it will start moving across and following and keeping up with your player. And that's pretty much how you want to have it, because you don't really want to have all 6,000 etc. width going and viewing at once. That's not gonna make anybody really happy. So yeah, that's pretty much how you make a simple 2D one level platformer in GameMaker through code only. You can, besides using codes, you can just, if you wanted to, you have all these sections right here where you can just drag and drop any of these into your actions without the use of code at all. But obviously, writing just strictly code will give you way more flexibility than just dragging and dropping things from the side here. And if you wanted to test your game, you can click this, which the green arrow, which will run your game, or the orange one, which will run your game in debug mode. File, you can create an application for it as well. So once you're done with the game, if you just wanted to create, say, just a simple thing, you just one executable, you just save it, and then you just put it on your desktop, and you can literally just double click it from outside of, you don't even have to have GameMaker installed on any PC. Once you make the executable, the executable is forever just going to be your game that you've made. So let's just save this. Yeah. And then it'll do this. It'll write it to the file. Then if you go to wherever you saved it, so right there, we have this. Bam, there's your executable for your game. You would just double click this and your game would start. So that's pretty much it.